The fluorescent lights of Sacred Heart Medical Center hummed overhead, casting their sterile glow across polished floors that reflected 1,000 silent prayers. In the pediatric wing, where hope and heartbreak walked hand in hand through corridors lined with crayon drawings and get-well cards, a story was unfolding that would shake the very foundations of what it meant to judge a person by their appearance. This is the story of a father's love so fierce it defied every obstacle, and a revelation so unexpected it would leave an entire hospital speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. His name was Marcus Chen, and if you had passed him in those hallways during those long, desperate weeks, you might have looked away. You might have assumed things about him based on the paint stains on his work boots, the exhaustion carved into his face, or the way his shoulders sagged under an invisible weight that seemed too heavy for any one person to carry. You would have been wrong about everything. Marcus had been a different man 3 years ago. Back then, he worked as a junior architect at a respected firm in Portland, wore pressed shirts to the office, and had dreams of designing buildings that would change skylines. He had a wife named Jennifer, who taught second grade and made the house smell like cinnamon on Sunday mornings. They had a daughter, Emma, who came into the world with a shock of black hair and eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies. Life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, built on a foundation of love and carefully laid plans for a future that stretched out before them like an open road. Then Jennifer got sick. It started with headaches she dismissed as stress, then dizzy spells she blamed on not eating enough. By the time the doctors found the tumor, it had already spread too far, roots digging deep into places medicine couldn't reach. She fought for 18 months, fought with every ounce of strength in her body, but some battles aren't meant to be won. She died on a Tuesday morning in October, leaving Marcus alone with a 2-year-old daughter and a grief so profound it felt like drowning in an ocean with no shore in sight. The medical bills from Jennifer's treatment had devoured their savings, their retirement accounts, everything they had built together. The life insurance policy they thought would protect them had a clause neither of them noticed, something about pre-existing conditions that the company used to deny the claim. Marcus found himself standing in the ruins of his old life, holding his daughter's small hand, trying to figure out how to keep moving forward when every step felt impossible. He couldn't maintain his position at the architecture firm. The hours were too demanding, and Emma needed him. Daycare costs in Portland might as well have been mortgage payments. His parents had passed years before, and Jennifer's family had moved to Australia shortly after the funeral, unable to bear the memories that haunted every corner of the city. So Marcus did what he had to do. He found work that paid by the hour and could bend around Emma's schedule. He became invisible in the way that working people often are, the ones who keep the world running while society looks right through them. His first job was the early morning shift at Riverside Diner, a 24-hour establishment near the industrial district where truck drivers and factory workers fueled up before dawn. Marcus arrived at 4 in the morning, brewed massive urns of coffee, flipped eggs and hash browns on a griddle that had seen better decades, and wiped down counters still sticky from the night shift. The owner, a gruff woman named Pat, who had run the place for 30 years, paid him cash at the end of each week and never asked questions about why an educated man was scraping grease traps for minimum wage. After his shift at the diner ended at noon, Marcus would rush across town to his second job at Harmon Construction Supply. He loaded lumber, bags of concrete, and sheets of drywall onto customer trucks, his architect's hands developing calluses and scars from splinters and rough edges. The manager there, a former Marine named Dave, appreciated that Marcus showed up on time and worked hard without complaint. The pay was slightly better than the diner, but the physical toll was brutal. Marcus's back ached constantly, a dull throb that never quite went away. 3 evenings a week, after picking Emma up from the subsidized after-school program at the community center, feeding her dinner, helping with homework, and tucking her into bed with stories about princesses who built castles out of Lego blocks. Marcus would head out to his third job. He cleaned office buildings downtown, pushing a janitor's cart through empty corporate suites, emptying trash cans and vacuuming carpets in spaces where people made in an hour what took him a week to earn. Sometimes he would pause in front of the architectural renderings hung in the lobbies, remembering the man he used to be, the dreams he used to have. Emma was 7 now, a bright spark of joy in Marcus's exhausted existence. She had her mother's smile and her father's determination, and she never complained about their tiny apartment in the subsidized housing complex on the east side of town, where the walls were thin and the heating barely worked in winter. She wore clothes from the thrift store and packed lunches made from whatever was on sale at the discount grocery store. And she treated every small joy like a treasure, the way children do when they understand, without being told that life is harder than it should be. But Emma had inherited something else from her mother, something that manifested just after her 7th birthday. She started getting tired easily, her vibrant energy fading like a light dimming. She bruised easily, purple and yellow marks appearing on her pale skin without explanation. Marcus noticed she wasn't eating as much, pushing food around her plate with a listlessness that terrified him. He took her to the free clinic, where a young doctor with kind eyes ran some basic blood work, and then, with a gravity that made Marcus's stomach drop, referred them to Sacred Heart Medical Center. The diagnosis came like a second death in Marcus's life: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The oncologist, Dr. Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a gentle manner that couldn't quite hide the seriousness of the situation, explained that Emma would need aggressive chemotherapy, possible radiation, and potentially a bone marrow transplant. She explained treatment protocols and survival rates, her words washing over Marcus like a wave he couldn't quite catch. All he could see was Emma sitting on the examination table, swinging her legs and humming to herself, unaware that her world was about to become an endless cycle of needles and nausea and fear. The hospital's financial coordinator, a tired-looking woman named Helen, who had clearly had this conversation 1,000 times before, laid out the costs with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned not to let emotion interfere with numbers. Even with the state insurance Marcus had managed to secure for Emma, the out-of-pocket costs would be astronomical. The experimental treatment that Dr. Morrison believed gave Emma the best chance, a targeted therapy combined with traditional chemotherapy, wasn't fully covered. They were looking at upwards of $200,000 in uncovered expenses. Marcus sat in that sterile office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and felt the walls closing in. He had already sold everything of value they owned. Jennifer's engagement ring, the one thing he had sworn he would save for Emma, had gone to a pawn shop 6 months earlier to cover rent when he'd gotten sick with the flu and missed a week of work. He had no assets, no collateral, no family to turn to. The hospital offered payment plans and suggested he look into charitable organizations that sometimes helped families in situations like his. But Helen's tone suggested she had seen how often those avenues led nowhere. What Helen and Dr. Morrison and every other person in that hospital didn't know, couldn't have known, was the fire that burned in Marcus Chen's chest. He had already lost his wife to a disease that ravaged her body while he stood helpless. He had already watched the life he built crumble into dust. He was not going to lose his daughter. Whatever it took, whatever he had to do, Emma was going to get the treatment she needed. Marcus found a 4th job, weekend overnight shifts at a warehouse loading delivery trucks. His body screamed in protest, muscles and joints pushed beyond any reasonable limit. He slept in fragments, 3 hours here, 2 hours there, power naps in his car between jobs. He stopped eating regular meals, subsisting on gas station coffee and whatever day-old pastries Pat let him take from the diner. His face became gaunt, his eyes hollowed, his movements those of a man running on fumes and desperation. Emma started her treatment. Marcus would sit beside her hospital bed during her infusion sessions, holding her small hand as poison designed to save her life dripped into her veins. She was so brave, braver than any child should have to be, cracking jokes with the nurses and chatting with other kids in the pediatric oncology ward as if they were all just hanging out instead of fighting for their lives. She lost her hair in clumps, waking up one morning to find her pillow covered in the black strands she had inherited from her father. She cried for an hour, then dried her tears and asked if they could pick out a cool hat instead. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus paid what he could toward the mounting bills, small amounts that barely made a dent in the growing balance. The hospital's billing department sent increasingly urgent notices. Helen tried to be sympathetic, but there were policies, procedures, warnings that if arrangements couldn't be made, Emma's treatment might have to be transferred to a county facility with far fewer resources and far worse outcomes. It was around this time that Marcus became a ghost in the hospital corridors. He was there so often, sleeping in waiting room chairs during Emma's overnight observation periods, that the security guards learned to recognize him and stopped checking his visitor badge. But recognition didn't mean respect. In his stained work clothes, unshaven face, and exhausted demeanor, Marcus looked exactly like what many people assumed he was. Another deadbeat parent, probably neglectful, possibly on drugs. Certainly not someone putting in the effort to actually help his sick child. The whispers started in the nursing stations. Some of the staff, the ones who didn't work directly with Emma, began speculating. They saw Marcus's appearance, noticed the way he sometimes dozed off in chairs, observed that he never seemed to have visitors or family support. One particularly judgmental nurse named Brenda made comments to her colleagues about parents who couldn't get their lives together, who brought children into the world they couldn't properly care for. She never said these things directly to Marcus, but he heard the tone in her voice when she spoke to him, felt the judgment in her eyes when she looked at him. Dr. Morrison noticed too. She saw how some of her staff treated Marcus, the assumptions they made, and it troubled her. She had reviewed Emma's case thoroughly and had spoken with the social worker assigned to the family. There was nothing in any report that suggested neglect or abuse. Emma was a well-adjusted, loved child whose father was clearly present and involved in her care. But Dr. Morrison was also aware of the unpaid balance growing in the billing system, the red flags that were starting to appear in Emma's file. One afternoon in late September, Marcus arrived at the hospital for Emma's scheduled chemotherapy session, coming straight from his construction supply job. He had cement dust in his hair and paint stains on his pants from helping load a contractor's truck. His hands were rough and cracked, fingernails rimmed with dirt that no amount of scrubbing in the warehouse bathroom could fully remove. He signed in at the pediatric oncology desk and headed toward Emma's usual treatment room. That's when he encountered Dr. Richard Pemberton, the hospital's chief administrator. Pemberton was a tall man in his early 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed. The kind of person who looked like he belonged in boardrooms and country clubs rather than hospital corridors. He was touring the pediatric wing with two members of the hospital's board of directors, pointing out recent renovations and discussing expansion plans. Marcus turned a corner and nearly collided with the group. He stepped aside quickly, mumbling an apology, but Pemberton's eyes had already swept over him with the kind of dismissive assessment that people of his station often gave to people they deemed beneath notice. The administrator's expression shifted to one of distaste, his gaze lingering on Marcus's work-stained clothes and exhausted appearance. Pemberton stopped mid-sentence in his conversation with the board members, his attention fully captured by Marcus's presence. There was something in the administrator's expression that went beyond mere disapproval, a kind of territorial instinct that seemed offended by the intrusion of someone so clearly out of place in his pristine medical facility. "Excuse me," Pemberton said, his voice carrying the clipped authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "Can I help you find something?" "Are you lost?" Marcus felt heat rise to his face, the familiar shame that had become a constant companion over the past 3 years. He was used to being looked at this way, used to the assumptions people made based on his appearance, but it never stopped stinging. Especially not here, not in the place where his daughter was fighting for her life. "No, sir, I'm not lost," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady, despite the exhaustion that made his bones feel like lead. "I'm here for my daughter's treatment. Emma Chen. She has a chemotherapy session scheduled for 2 o'clock. One of the board members, a woman in an expensive navy suit, exchanged a glance with her colleague. Pemberton's eyebrows rose slightly, and Marcus could practically see the calculations happening behind the man's eyes. He had clearly checked the financial reports recently, knew which families were behind on their payments, understood exactly who Marcus Chen was and what he represented in the hospital's balance sheets. "Ah yes, Emma Chen," Pemberton said, and there was something new in his tone now, something that made Marcus's hands curl into fists at his sides. "Mr. Chen, I was actually hoping to speak with you. Perhaps we could step into my office for a moment. I believe there are some matters we need to discuss regarding your daughter's care." The way he said it in front of the board members, with that particular emphasis on the word matters, made it clear this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. Marcus glanced at his watch. Emma would be waiting for him, probably already in her treatment room with her favorite nurse Maya, who always made sure she had the good apple juice and the warm blankets. He didn't want to be late, didn't want Emma to worry even for a second that he wasn't coming. "With respect, sir, I need to be with my daughter right now," Marcus said, trying to keep his tone polite but firm. "If this is about the billing, I've been making payments. I know I'm behind, but I'm working on it. I can come by your office after Emma's session." Pemberton's jaw tightened slightly, clearly not accustomed to anyone declining his requests. The board members were watching now with open interest, and Marcus realized with sinking certainty that he had somehow become an object lesson in this man's tour, an example of something he was about to be made to represent. "Mr. Chen, I'm afraid this can't wait," Pemberton insisted, his voice taking on an edge that suggested this was not a request, but a command. "Your account is severely delinquent. We're talking about over $170,000 in unpaid charges, and that number grows with each treatment. The hospital has been more than patient, but we have fiscal responsibilities. Surely you can understand that we can't simply provide unlimited care without any guarantee of payment." Marcus felt his face burning now, aware of the nurses who had paused at their stations, the visitors in the hallway who had turned to watch this public humiliation unfold. This was deliberate, he realized. Pemberton could have called him into his office privately, could have handled this with discretion. Instead, he was making a spectacle, and Marcus understood why. The board members needed to see that their administrator was tough on deadbeat accounts, that he wasn't letting people take advantage of the hospital's charity. "I understand that, sir," Marcus said, his voice low but carrying an edge of steel that came from somewhere deep inside, the place where he kept the last reserves of his dignity. "And I'm not asking for anything free. I'm working 4 jobs to pay for my daughter's treatment. Every cent I make goes toward her care or keeping a roof over our heads. I've given the billing office everything I can, and I'll keep giving everything I can until the debt is paid." "4 jobs?" Pemberton repeated, and there was open skepticism in his voice now. He glanced at Marcus's appearance again, the stained clothes, the exhausted face, letting his eyes communicate what his words were dancing around. He clearly didn't believe Marcus, clearly thought this was an exaggeration or an excuse. "Mr. Chen, if you were truly working 4 jobs, surely you would be able to make more substantial progress on this balance. The fact is, your daughter requires extremely expensive care, and frankly, I have to question whether continuing this treatment is even feasible given your financial situation." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat, felt the world narrow to a pinpoint of white-hot anger mixed with pure terror. Was this man actually suggesting what Marcus thought he was suggesting? Was he implying that Emma's treatment should be stopped because her father was poor? "What exactly are you saying?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet now. Pemberton seemed to sense he had pushed too far, but he was committed now, especially with the board members watching. He couldn't back down without appearing weak. "I'm saying that we need to have a realistic conversation about your daughter's treatment plan. There are county facilities, public health programs that are better equipped to handle cases where payment is unlikely. Sacred Heart is a private institution, and while we do provide charity care, there are limits to what we can absorb. Your daughter's treatment protocol is one of the most expensive we offer. Perhaps a more modest approach at a different facility would be more appropriate for your circumstances." The board members looked uncomfortable now, shifting their weight and avoiding Marcus's eyes. Even they seemed to recognize that Pemberton had crossed a line, had said aloud what was usually communicated through bureaucratic channels and carefully worded letters. But neither of them stepped in to stop him. Marcus felt something break inside him, some final barrier between the man he had been and the man these circumstances were forcing him to become. His hands were shaking, his vision blurring at the edges, and he realized distantly that he was on the verge of losing control entirely. But Emma was waiting for him. Emma needed him. He couldn't afford to fall apart, couldn't afford to give these people any more ammunition to use against his daughter. "My daughter," Marcus said, each word carefully controlled, "is getting the treatment that Dr. Morrison prescribed, the treatment that gives her the best chance of survival. I don't care what it costs or how long it takes me to pay it back. I will work until my body gives out if that's what it takes. And if you try to transfer her to a county facility or reduce her care because I'm not rich enough for your private hospital, they will make so much noise that every news station in this city will know exactly what kind of place Sacred Heart really is." It was an empty threat, really. Marcus had no connections to media, no platform to make good on his words, but desperation made him bold. And something in his eyes must have communicated that he meant every syllable, that he would burn down the world if that's what it took to save his daughter. Pemberton's face flushed red, and for a moment Marcus thought the man might actually call security to have him removed. But then Dr. Morrison appeared at the end of the hallway, her presence cutting through the tension like a knife. "Mr. Chen," she called out, her voice warm and professional, clearly unaware of what she had just walked into. "Emma's all set up and asking for you. She wants to know if you brought the cards so you can play Go Fish during her infusion." The spell broke. Pemberton straightened his tie, clearly deciding to retreat and regroup rather than continue this confrontation in front of Dr. Morrison, who was well respected and might ask uncomfortable questions about what was being said to one of her patient's parents. The board members took the opportunity to move down the hallway, suddenly very interested in examining a display about the hospital's founding history. "This conversation isn't over, Mr. Chen," Pemberton said quietly, but with unmistakable menace. "We'll be scheduling a formal review of your daughter's case. I suggest you make arrangements." Then he walked away, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished floor, leaving Marcus standing there feeling like he had just barely survived a car crash. Dr. Morrison approached, concern evident in her expression. She had clearly sensed something was wrong, even if she hadn't heard the specifics. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her eyes searching Marcus's face. Marcus wanted to tell her everything, wanted to explain about Pemberton's threats and the fear that was eating him alive from the inside. But what could she do? Dr. Morrison was a physician, not an administrator. She controlled Emma's medical care, but not the hospital's billing policies. And he couldn't risk saying anything that might jeopardize Emma's treatment, couldn't afford to make waves when his daughter's life hung in the balance. "Everything's fine," Marcus lied, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. "Just tired. Let's go see Emma." They walked together toward the treatment room, Dr. Morrison making small talk about Emma's recent blood counts and how well she was responding to the current round of chemotherapy. Marcus nodded and made appropriate responses, but his mind was elsewhere, spinning through impossible calculations of how he could possibly come up with the money to satisfy Pemberton before the man made good on his threat. Emma was indeed waiting in the treatment room, sitting up in the hospital bed with her favorite stuffed penguin, Mr. Waddles, tucked under her arm. She had lost all her hair weeks ago, and the bare scalp made her look both younger and older than her 7 years. But her smile when she saw Marcus was pure sunshine, the kind of unfiltered joy that children possess even in the darkest circumstances. Daddy!" she called out, reaching her arms up for a hug. "You're here!" "Maya said you might be late because of work, but I told her you're never late." Marcus crossed the room and wrapped his daughter in his arms. Breathing in the antiseptic smell of hospital soap mixed with the faint strawberry scent of the special lotion the nurses used to keep her skin from getting too dry. He held her carefully, conscious of the port in her chest where the chemotherapy drugs would be administered, conscious of how fragile she felt in his arms. "I would never miss our date," Marcus said, pulling back to look at her face, memorizing it the way he did every day, terrified of a future where he might not be able to see it anymore. "Did you bring your cards?" "Because I've been practicing, and I think today might be the day I finally beat you at Go Fish." Emma giggled, the sound like bells, like everything good in the world concentrated into one perfect note. "You say that every time, Daddy, and I win every time." "Well, maybe I'm just letting you win," Marcus teased, settling into the chair beside her bed as Maya, the nurse, began preparing the chemotherapy drugs with practiced efficiency. "Are not," Emma protested, but she was smiling, pulling out the worn deck of cards from her backpack that sat on the bedside table. For the next 3 hours, Marcus sat with his daughter as poison dripped into her veins with the intention of saving her life. They played Go Fish, and Emma won every game just like she always did. They watched videos on Marcus's phone, Emma's favorite cooking show, where a cheerful host made elaborate cakes shaped like cartoon characters. They talked about school, about the book report Emma was working on, about a girl detective who solved mysteries, about whether penguins or polar bears would win in a fight. Marcus didn't tell Emma about the confrontation with Pemberton. He didn't tell her that the man who ran the hospital thought she wasn't worth the cost of her own life. He didn't tell her that her father had been publicly humiliated and threatened, that the fear sitting in his chest felt like a living thing trying to claw its way out. He just sat with her and made her laugh and held her hand when the nausea started, and she needed to focus on breathing through it. When the infusion was finally complete and Emma had been monitored long enough to ensure she wasn't having any immediate adverse reactions, Marcus helped her gather her things. She was tired now. The treatment always left her drained, but she kept up a brave face as they made their way out of the pediatric oncology ward. They passed the nursing station where Brenda, the judgmental nurse, was working. She looked up as they passed, her eyes meeting Marcus's for just a moment, and he saw the same dismissive assessment he had seen in Pemberton's gaze. These people had no idea, Marcus thought as he guided Emma toward the elevator. They had no idea what he sacrificed, what he endured, how many hours he worked while his body screamed for rest. They saw his stained clothes and his exhausted face, and they made assumptions, reducing him to a stereotype, a cautionary tale about poor life choices. They didn't see the man who had built a life with his hands and his mind, who had loved a woman through her dying days, who would gladly trade his own life for his daughter's without a moment's hesitation. The ride home in Marcus's ancient Honda Civic was quiet, Emma dozing in the passenger seat as the medication made her drowsy. Marcus drove on autopilot, his mind racing through scenarios. He couldn't take on another job because there were literally no more hours in the week to give. He had already applied for every assistance program, every grant, every charity fund that might help with medical expenses. Most had waiting lists months long. Others had already turned him down because he made just slightly too much money to qualify. Never mind that every cent he earned was already spoken for. He thought about Pemberton's threat, about the formal review that was coming. What would that look like? Would they simply stop Emma's treatment? Would they demand payment in full before continuing? The experimental protocol she was on was showing real results. Her latest scans had shown the tumors shrinking, but it required consistency. Missing even one cycle could compromise everything. By the time they reached their apartment, Emma was fully asleep. Marcus carried her inside, her thin body weighing almost nothing in his arms. He tucked her into her bed, the one they had found at a garage sale, and painted together with purple flowers because purple was her favorite color. He stood there for a long moment, watching her sleep, her chest rising and falling with each breath, each one a small miracle he never took for granted. Then Marcus went to the kitchen, such as it was, a narrow galley with outdated appliances and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly. He made himself a cup of instant coffee, the cheap kind that tasted like burnt rubber, but had enough caffeine to keep him functional. He had 2 hours before he needed to leave for his evening office cleaning shift, 2 hours to try to figure out a solution to an impossible problem. He pulled out his laptop, an old machine that took forever to boot up, and started searching again. Medical debt relief programs, hospital financial assistance, emergency charity funds. He filled out applications he had already filled out before, hoping that maybe this time someone would see his desperation and throw him a lifeline. He looked at the fundraising websites where people told their stories and asked strangers for help. But the thought of exposing Emma's situation to the world, of making her illness public entertainment, made his stomach turn. Around 6 o'clock his phone rang. Unknown number. Marcus almost didn't answer, assuming it was another bill collector or automated marketing call, but something made him pick up. Mr. Chen? A woman's voice, professional but not unkind. This is Janet Winters from Sacred Heart's Patient Advocacy Office. I wanted to reach out to you regarding your daughter Emma's case. Would you have a few minutes to talk? Marcus's heart sank. This was it, he thought. This was Pemberton making good on his threat, sending someone from patient advocacy to deliver the bad news with a softer touch. They were going to tell him Emma's treatment would be discontinued or transferred unless he could produce money he didn't have. I have time, Marcus said, his voice flat. There was no point in delaying the inevitable. I understand there was an incident today with Dr. Pemberton, Janet said, and Marcus could hear papers rustling on her end of the line. I want you to know that patient advocacy exists to help families navigate difficult situations. I've reviewed Emma's file, and I can see that you've been making regular payments, even if they're small relative to the total balance. That shows good faith. But it's not enough, Marcus finished for her. That's what you're calling to tell me, right? That good faith doesn't pay for chemotherapy drugs that cost thousands of dollars per dose. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Janet spoke again, her voice was gentler. Mr. Chen, I'm not calling to threaten you or to tell you we're stopping Emma's treatment. I'm calling because I want to help you explore every possible option. Sometimes there are programs or resources that families aren't aware of. I'd like to set up a meeting with you, maybe tomorrow if you're available, to go through everything comprehensively. Would that work? Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, exhaustion and stress finally cracking through his defenses. Someone was offering help instead of judgment, even if it might ultimately lead nowhere. It was more than anyone had offered in a long time. Yes, he said, his voice rough. Thank you. I can come tomorrow after my morning shift. Around 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock works perfectly, Janet confirmed. I'll make sure I have all your paperwork ready. And Mr. Chen, Emma is lucky to have you fighting for her. After the call ended, Marcus sat in his dim kitchen, staring at nothing. Emma was lucky to have him fighting for her, Janet had said. But what good was fighting when the system was rigged against people like him? What good was love and determination when money was the only language that mattered? He finished his coffee, changed into the slightly cleaner work clothes he kept for his janitorial job, and quietly left the apartment. Their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who had taken a grandmotherly interest in Emma, would check on her every hour while Marcus was gone. It wasn't ideal leaving a sick child alone, but what choice did he have? He needed every dollar those cleaning shifts provided. That night, as Marcus pushed his cart through empty corporate offices, vacuuming carpets and scrubbing toilets, he thought about Pemberton's face. about the casual cruelty in the man's voice when he suggested Emma's life wasn't worth the expense. He thought about the board members who had watched his humiliation like it was entertainment. He thought about Brenda the nurse and her sideways glances that communicated so clearly what she thought of him. What none of them understood, what none of them could possibly understand, was that Marcus had already lost everything once. He had watched his wife die despite the best medical care money could buy, had held her hand as the life faded from her eyes, had felt his heart break into pieces he was still trying to reassemble. He had been forced to abandon his career, his dreams, his entire identity. He had been stripped down to nothing but survival and desperation. But he was still standing, exhausted, humiliated, ground down to the bone, but still standing. And as long as he was standing, Emma had a chance. That was what these people didn't understand. They could judge him, dismiss him, threaten him, but they couldn't make him give up. Not on his daughter, never on his daughter. Around 2 a.m, cleaning an executive office on the 20th floor, Marcus paused at the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Portland's downtown skyline. He had worked on one of those buildings during his architecture days, a mixed-use development with residential units above retail space. He could see it from here, his design brought to life in steel and glass, a monument to a life that felt like it had belonged to someone else entirely. For just a moment, Marcus let himself wonder what his life might have looked like if Jennifer hadn't gotten sick. If Emma hadn't developed leukemia, if the universe had shown them even a fraction of the mercy they deserved. He would probably still be designing buildings, still be making partner track at the firm, still be living in a real house instead of a subsidized apartment where the heat barely worked. Emma would be healthy, running and playing and thinking about things like soccer practice and sleepovers instead of chemotherapy schedules and blood counts. But that wasn't the world he lived in. This was the world he lived in, the one where he scrubbed other people's toilets at 2 a.m. and got threatened by hospital administrators during the day. This was the world where love and determination and sacrifice weren't enough, where the value of a child's life could be calculated on a spreadsheet and found wanting. Marcus turned away from the window and went back to work. He had 3 more floors to clean before his shift ended, and then a few precious hours of sleep before he had to be back at the diner for the morning rush. He couldn't afford to waste time on self-pity or what-ifs. He just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time, one floor at a time, one impossible day at a time. What Marcus didn't know, couldn't have known, as he pushed his janitor's cart through those silent offices, was that his story was about to take a turn that would change everything. Someone had been watching, someone had been listening, someone had been waiting for exactly the right moment to step in. And that moment was coming faster than anyone could have imagined. But for now, in the depths of a Portland night that felt as dark and endless as his struggles, Marcus Chen just cleaned and hoped and refused to break. Because that's what fathers do. That's what love demands. And Marcus had already decided long ago that he would pay any price, endure any hardship, face any humiliation if it meant his daughter got to live. Even if the world kept trying to tell him she wasn't worth it, Marcus knew better. Emma was worth everything, and somehow, some way, he was going to prove it. The meeting with Janet Winters from Patient Advocacy had gone exactly as Marcus expected, which is to say, it had yielded nothing concrete. She was sympathetic, genuinely so, but sympathy didn't pay medical bills. She had helped him apply for 2 additional grant programs and suggested he write a letter to the hospital's charitable foundation board. But both options came with waiting periods measured in months. Emma didn't have months to wait, while bureaucrats reviewed applications and committees met quarterly to discuss funding allocations. 3 days had passed since the confrontation with Pemberton, and Marcus could feel the weight of that promised formal review hanging over him like an executioner's blade. He went through his routines with mechanical precision, the diner shift where his hands moved on autopilot cracking eggs and pouring coffee, the construction supply yard where his back screamed as he loaded heavy materials, The evening cleaning shifts, where he became invisible among the empty corporate spaces. In between, he sat with Emma during her treatments, playing cards and telling stories, and pretending that everything was going to be fine. It was a Thursday morning, overcast and threatening rain, when Marcus arrived at the diner for his 4 a.m. shift. Pat was already there, as she always was, a woman who seemed to run on cigarette smoke and determination. She looked up from the industrial coffee maker she was wrestling with, her weathered face creasing into a frown. "You look like death warmed over, Chen," she said bluntly. Pat had never been one for sugarcoating. "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours straight?" Marcus shrugged as he tied on his grease-stained apron. "Sleep is overrated. Coffee exists for a reason. Coffee exists so people can function. You're beyond functioning. You're running on fumes and stubbornness." She finished with the coffee maker and turned to face him fully, her arms crossed. "I'm worried about you, kid. You can't keep this pace forever. Your body's going to give out." "It just needs to hold together long enough," Marcus replied, moving past her to start prepping the grill. He didn't want to have this conversation, didn't want Pat's concern, even though he knew it came from a good place. Concern didn't change anything. Concern didn't pay Emma's medical bills or convince hospital administrators that poor people's children deserved to live. The morning rush came and went in its usual blur of short-order tickets and demanding customers. Marcus worked mechanically, his hands performing tasks they had done thousands of times, while his mind drifted elsewhere. He was thinking about the numbers, always the numbers. Even if he got approved for those grant programs Janet had mentioned, even if the hospital's charitable foundation decided to help, there would still be a gap. There was always a gap, a shortfall, an amount that somehow always remained just out of reach. Around 11:30, about half an hour before his shift would end, the diner door opened and a group of people walked in. Marcus was in the back scraping the grill and didn't pay attention at first. The lunch crowd was starting to trickle in, nothing unusual about that. But then he heard Pat's voice, sharper than normal, with an edge of surprise. "Can I help you folks? We don't usually get." "Well, you're certainly welcome. Just surprised is all." Curiosity made Marcus glance through the pass-through window that connected the kitchen to the dining area. What he saw made him pause mid-scrape, his hand freezing in place. There were 5 of them, and they looked completely out of place in the greasy spoon diner that catered to blue-collar workers and truckers. They were dressed in expensive business attire, suits that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. But it wasn't their clothes that caught his attention. It was the way they moved, with purpose and confidence, like people who were used to commanding rooms and making decisions that affected lives. The man leading the group was in his late 50s, African-American, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested authority without arrogance. He wore a charcoal suit with a burgundy tie, and there was something about his face that nagged at Marcus's memory, like he should recognize him, but couldn't quite place from where. "We're looking for someone," the man said to Pat, his voice deep and measured. "A man named Marcus Chen. We were told he works here." Marcus felt his heart drop into his stomach. This was it, he thought. Somehow Pemberton had escalated things faster than expected. These were lawyers, probably, coming to serve him with papers about Emma's treatment being discontinued. Or maybe they were from some debt collection agency, here to threaten wage garnishment or legal action. His hands started to shake slightly, the old anxiety that was his constant companion rising up to choke him. Pat's eyes flicked toward the kitchen, toward Marcus, and there was concern in her expression. "Who's asking?" she said, and there was steel in her voice now. Pat might run a dive diner, but she protected her people, and Marcus had become one of her people over the past 3 years. "My name is Dr. James Crawford," the man said, and something in the way he said it suggested he expected the name to be recognized. "I'm the chief of pediatric oncology at Seattle Children's Hospital. These are my colleagues. We've driven down from Seattle this morning specifically to speak with Mr. Chen. It's regarding his daughter, Emma." Marcus's legs felt weak. "Seattle Children's Hospital. That was one of the premier pediatric cancer treatment centers on the entire West Coast. Why would their chief of oncology drive 3 hours to Portland to talk to him? Had something happened? Had Emma's case been reviewed by other doctors who found something wrong with her treatment protocol? Or worse, had Pemberton somehow spread word through the medical community that the Chen family was a credit risk, poisoning any chance Marcus might have had of getting help elsewhere? He stepped out from the kitchen, his apron still on, his hands still shaking slightly. All 5 of the visitors turned to look at him, and Marcus felt exposed under their collective gaze, aware of how he must look with his worn clothes and exhausted face. "I'm Marcus Chen," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "What's this about? Is Emma okay? Did something happen?" Dr. Crawford's expression softened immediately, and he held up a hand in a gesture of reassurance. "Emma is fine, Mr. Chen. This isn't about her medical condition worsening. In fact, from what I understand, she's responding quite well to her current treatment protocol. We're here about something else entirely. Is there somewhere we could talk privately?" Pat immediately stepped in. "You can use my office in the back. It's not fancy, but it's got a door and chairs." She shot Marcus a look that clearly said she'd be right outside if he needed her, ready to throw these people out if they caused trouble. Marcus led the group through the kitchen, past the industrial dishwasher and the walk-in cooler, to Pat's small office that was really more of a storage closet with a desk crammed into it. There weren't enough chairs for everyone, so 3 of the visitors remained standing, while Dr. Crawford and Marcus sat. The others introduced themselves as Dr. Crawford, gestured to each in turn. Dr. Sarah Kim, a pediatric surgical oncologist. David Chen, no relation despite the shared last name, who was identified as a hospital administrator and financial coordinator. Rebecca Martinez, who apparently worked in something called donor relations. And finally, Thomas Brennan, who was introduced simply as legal counsel. The presence of a lawyer made Marcus's anxiety spike even higher. Whatever this was about, it was serious enough to require legal representation. He sat rigid in the chair, his hands gripped together in his lap to stop them from trembling. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Crawford began, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees in a posture that seemed designed to appear non-threatening. "I want to start by apologizing for the dramatic nature of this visit. I'm sure having us show up at your workplace unannounced is concerning. But what we have to discuss is time-sensitive, and we wanted to speak with you in person rather than over the phone." "Just tell me what this is about," Marcus said, unable to keep the edge of desperation out of his voice. "If Emma needs something, if there's a problem with her treatment, please just tell me directly." "There's no problem with her treatment," Dr. Crawford assured him. "In fact, I've reviewed her case file extensively over the past 48 hours, and Dr. Morrison is doing excellent work. The protocol Emma is on is aggressive but appropriate, and her response has been encouraging. That's not why we're here." "Then why are you here?" Marcus asked, confusion mixing with his anxiety now. "I don't understand. You drove 3 hours from Seattle to tell me that Emma's treatment is going well. That doesn't make sense." Dr. Crawford exchanged glances with his colleagues, and something passed between them, some kind of silent communication. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He set it on the desk between them, but didn't open it yet. "Mr. Chen, are you familiar with the Brennan Foundation?" Dr. Crawford asked. Marcus shook his head. The name meant nothing to him. He had applied to so many charitable foundations and assistance programs over the past months that they all blurred together. But he didn't recall that specific name. "The Brennan Foundation," Dr. Crawford continued, "is a private charitable organization that focuses specifically on pediatric cancer treatment. It was founded 20 years ago by Thomas Brennan Sr. after his own daughter died from leukemia. The Foundation's mission is to ensure that no child is denied potentially life-saving treatment due to financial constraints. They work quietly, deliberately, identifying cases where they can make the most impact." Marcus's heart was starting to pound now, a different kind of fear, mixing with something he was afraid to identify as hope. He had been burned too many times, had too many doors slammed in his face to let himself believe this conversation was going where it seemed to be going. 2 days ago, Dr. Crawford said, the Foundation was contacted by someone at Sacred Heart Medical Center. An anonymous call from someone who works in your daughter's unit. This person was troubled by something they had witnessed, a confrontation between you and a hospital administrator. They felt that what was happening to your family was exactly the kind of situation the Foundation exists to address. Marcus felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes, and he blinked rapidly, trying to maintain control. Someone at the hospital had called on his behalf. One of the nurses, maybe, or a staff member who had witnessed the public humiliation Pemberton had subjected him to. He had felt so alone in that moment, so utterly isolated, and the idea that someone had seen his struggle and cared enough to reach out felt overwhelming. The Foundation did their due diligence, Dr. Crawford continued. They investigated your situation, verified your employment history, confirmed Emma's diagnosis and treatment plan. They spoke with Dr. Morrison, though she doesn't know the full context of why they were inquiring. And they asked me to review Emma's case from a medical perspective to ensure that the treatment she's receiving represents the best possible approach to her condition. And Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper now. And I concur with Dr. Morrison's treatment plan completely, Dr. Crawford said firmly. The protocol Emma is on, while expensive, offers her the best statistical chance of long-term remission. The experimental targeted therapy combined with traditional chemotherapy is exactly what I would prescribe for a patient with her specific condition and biomarkers. She should absolutely continue with this treatment at Sacred Heart, where she has established care and rapport with her medical team. Rebecca Martinez, the woman who had been introduced as working in donor relations, spoke up for the first time. Her voice was warm, almost gentle. Mr. Chen, the Foundation has reviewed your case and made a decision. They want to provide full funding for Emma's treatment, both the costs already incurred and all future treatment-related expenses until she's cleared of cancer. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He actually felt dizzy, like the small office was tilting around him. Full funding, all costs. It wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. There had to be a catch, some impossible condition he would be unable to meet. I don't understand, Marcus said, shaking his head. Why? Why would they do this? What do you want from me? Thomas Brennan, the lawyer who shared a name with the Foundation's founder and was presumably related, spoke for the first time. His voice was professional but not cold. The Foundation asks nothing in return, Mr. Chen. This is not a loan. You won't be expected to pay anything back. There are no strings attached, no publicity requirements, no expectations beyond that you allow your daughter to receive the treatment she needs. But Marcus struggled to form words, his mind reeling. But the amount, it's almost $200,000 already, and treatment could go on for years. That's an insane amount of money. Why would they just give that to us? Dr. Crawford's expression became more serious, more emotional, because 20 years ago, Thomas Brennan Sr. watched his daughter die because they couldn't afford experimental treatment that might have saved her life. They had insurance, they weren't poor, but the specific treatment she needed wasn't covered, and they couldn't come up with the money fast enough. By the time they managed to pull together funding through loans and selling assets, it was too late. She died at age 6. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face now, unable to stop them. He thought of Emma, of her smile and her bravery, of the way she fought through every treatment with a courage that humbled him. He thought of how close he had come to losing her not to cancer, but to poverty, to a system that put price tags on children's lives. Mr. Brennan spent the rest of his life making sure other families wouldn't face what his family faced. Dr. Crawford continued. The Foundation has helped over 300 families in the past 2 decades. They prefer to work quietly, to let the focus remain on the children and their recovery rather than on the charity itself. but they are very, very serious about their mission. David Chen, the financial coordinator, opened his own folder and slid a document across the desk. This is a letter of commitment from the foundation. It guarantees payment of all outstanding balances related to Emma's care at Sacred Heart and establishes an account that will cover all future treatment costs. I've already been in contact with Sacred Heart's billing department. As of this morning, your account has been marked as having foundation sponsorship. You won't receive any more bills or payment demands. Marcus picked up the letter with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the official letterhead and formal language that promised everything he had been desperately fighting for. It felt surreal, like a dream he was going to wake up from any moment. But the paper was real in his hands, the signatures at the bottom were real, and the 5 people crowded into this tiny office were real. "I don't know what to say," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "I've been so scared. I've been working myself to death, trying to keep up with the costs, and I was still falling further behind." The hospital administrator, Pemberton, he threatened to transfer Emma to a county facility, implied that her treatment was too expensive for someone like me. I thought I was going to lose her, not to the cancer, but because I couldn't afford to save her. Dr. Crawford's jaw tightened, and there was anger in his eyes now. That should never have happened. No parent should ever be made to feel that their child's life is negotiable based on their bank account. What Dr. Pemberton did was unconscionable, and frankly, it's part of why the Foundation moved so quickly on your case. They wanted to ensure that no administrative red tape or financial gatekeeping could prevent Emma from getting her treatment. Rebecca Martinez added, "We've also taken the liberty of contacting Dr. Morrison directly this morning. She's been informed that Emma's care now has full financial backing, and that she should proceed with whatever treatment protocols she deems medically appropriate, without any concern for cost considerations." Dr. Morrison was, I have to say, absolutely thrilled. She apparently had been advocating with the hospital's financial office on your behalf. Marcus thought of Dr. Morrison, of her kindness and her expertise, of the way she always treated Emma like a person rather than a patient, and he felt another wave of gratitude crash over him. He had felt so alone, but people had been fighting for them. People he didn't even know were in his corner. "There's one more thing," Thomas Brennan said, and he pulled out another document. "The Foundation has also established what we call a family support fund. We recognize that fighting childhood cancer isn't just about medical bills. There are other costs: lost wages, transportation, housing if treatment requires relocation, basic living expenses. The Foundation is providing an additional monthly stipend to help cover these costs. It's not a fortune, but it should allow you to reduce your work hours and spend more time with Emma during her treatment." Marcus stared at the figure written on the document, and fresh tears blurred his vision. It was more than he made from his diner job, enough that he could quit at least 2 of his 4 jobs and still keep the apartment, still feed them, still keep the lights on. He could actually sleep. He could be present with Emma, really present, instead of showing up exhausted and running on fumes. "I don't deserve this," Marcus said, the words tumbling out unbidden. "I haven't done anything to earn this kind of help. There are probably other families who need it more, who are more deserving." Dr. Crawford leaned forward and looked Marcus directly in the eyes with an intensity that demanded attention. "Mr. Chen, you've been working 4 jobs simultaneously to pay for your daughter's treatment. You've sacrificed sleep, health, any semblance of a normal life. You've faced judgment and humiliation and kept showing up for your daughter every single day. You've advocated for her, protected her, fought for her with everything you have. How dare you say you don't deserve help?" The words hit Marcus like a slap, but a necessary one. He had spent so long being ground down by the system, being made to feel like he was failing, that he had internalized the message that he wasn't enough, that he didn't deserve better. But Dr. Crawford was right. He had fought. He had never given up. Maybe that did mean something after all. "What do I need to do?" Marcus asked, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to pull himself together. What's the next step? David Chen smiled, the first real smile from any of the group since they had arrived. You just need to sign some paperwork, acknowledging the Foundation's sponsorship and authorizing them to work directly with Sacred Heart's billing department. Everything else is handled. The Foundation will coordinate with the hospital. Payments will be processed, and you can focus on what matters, being there for Emma. They spent the next 20 minutes going through documents, Marcus signing his name again and again, each signature feeling like a weight lifting from his shoulders. The legal language was complex, but Thomas Brennan walked him through every section, making sure he understood that this wasn't creating any debt or obligation, that the Foundation's support was unconditional. When the paperwork was complete, Dr. Crawford stood and extended his hand. Marcus shook it, feeling the strength and warmth in the older man's grip. "Thank you," Marcus said, and the words felt completely inadequate for what he was feeling. "Thank you doesn't even begin to cover it, but I don't have better words. You've saved my daughter's life. You've saved both our lives. Thank the anonymous caller who reached out to the Foundation," Dr. Crawford replied. "They're the one who brought your situation to our attention. And thank yourself for being the kind of father who never gave up, even when everything seemed impossible." As the group prepared to leave, Rebecca Martinez turned back to Marcus. "One more thing, Mr. Chen. The Foundation would like to stay updated on Emma's progress, not for publicity purposes, just because they care. Would you be comfortable with periodic updates, maybe just an email every few months letting us know how she's doing?" "Of course," Marcus said immediately. "Absolutely. Whatever you need. I'll send pictures and updates and anything you want." After they left, after Marcus watched them walk out through the diner and climb into their expensive rental car, he stood in Pat's office and let himself cry. Really cry, the kind of deep, racking sobs that came from a place of relief so profound it was almost painful. Pat found him there 5 minutes later and, without saying a word, pulled him into a hug. This gruff woman who ran a greasy spoon diner and pretended to be tougher than she was. "Good news, I take it?" she asked when Marcus finally pulled away, wiping his face with his sleeve. "They're paying for everything," Marcus said, his voice still shaky. "Everything, Pat. All of Emma's treatment, all the bills, everything. There's a foundation. They do this for families like us. And someone at the hospital called them about us, and they're covering everything." Pat's eyes got suspiciously bright, and she cleared her throat roughly. "Well then, guess you'll be quitting on me soon, huh?" "Can't say I blame you. This job sucks." Marcus laughed, the sound coming out watery but genuine. "I probably should quit. They're giving us enough support that I can cut back to maybe just 1 or 2 jobs. But if you'll have me, I'd like to keep this one. Just maybe not the 5 in the morning shifts every single day." "You got it, kid," Pat said gruffly. "Now get out of here. Go tell your daughter that everything's going to be okay." Marcus left the diner in a daze, his mind still reeling from how completely his world had shifted in the span of one conversation. He drove to Emma's school, arriving just as the lunch period was ending. He signed her out early, citing a doctor's appointment, and took her for ice cream at the shop near their apartment, even though he had always been too broke to justify the expense before. Emma ate her strawberry ice cream cone with chocolate sprinkles, chattering about her friend Ashley and the art project they were working on, and Marcus just watched her, this beautiful, brave little girl who had fought so hard without ever complaining. He thought about telling her about the Foundation, about explaining that the medical bills that had been crushing them were gone, but he decided to wait. There would be time for explanations later. For now, he just wanted to sit with his daughter in an ice cream shop on a Thursday afternoon and feel for the first time in longer than he could remember, like maybe everything was actually going to be okay. The transformation in Marcus's life didn't happen all at once, but rather in a series of small moments that accumulated into something that felt almost like normalcy. The first change came the very next morning when Marcus woke up at 6 in the morning instead of 3:45. He lay in bed for a moment, disoriented by the sunlight filtering through the thin curtains of their apartment, his body confused by the absence of the alarm that usually dragged him from sleep into darkness. He had called Pat the night before and given his notice for the early morning shifts. She had pretended to grumble about finding a replacement, but her voice was warm when she told him to take care of himself and Emma. He had also contacted Dave at Harmon Construction Supply and explained he could only work 3 days a week instead of 5. Dave had been surprisingly understanding, mentioning that his own sister had fought breast cancer years ago and he knew what it was like for families going through treatment. The weekend janitorial shifts were the next to go. Marcus sent a respectful email to the cleaning company's supervisor, thanking them for the work, but explaining his circumstances had changed. Within 24 hours of the Foundation's visit, Marcus had cut his work schedule from brutal to merely demanding. He was keeping his lunch shifts at the diner 4 days a week, partly because he genuinely liked Pat and the regular customers, and partly because maintaining some work felt important to his sense of identity. He wasn't ready to stop working entirely, even though the Foundation's stipend would have allowed it. But the most significant change came on Monday morning when Marcus walked into Sacred Heart Medical Center with Emma for her scheduled appointment with Dr. Morrison. He had been dreading this visit all weekend, uncertain how the news about the Foundation would be received. Worried that somehow there had been a mistake or miscommunication and he would arrive to find nothing had actually changed. They checked in at the pediatric oncology desk and Marcus held his breath as the receptionist, a young woman named Claire, pulled up Emma's account on her computer. He watched her face, trying to read any sign of trouble, but Claire just smiled and handed him the usual forms to update Emma's information. "Dr. Morrison is running about 10 minutes behind," Claire said cheerfully. "You can wait in the usual room. Maya will be Emma's nurse again today. No mention of payment. No request to stop by the billing office. No pointed questions about when he planned to address his balance." Marcus felt tension he hadn't realized he was carrying start to ease from his shoulders. Emma was in good spirits, excited because Maya had promised to show her pictures of her new puppy. They settled into the familiar treatment room, and Marcus helped Emma climb onto the examination table, her legs dangling over the edge as she swung them back and forth with nervous energy. She was anxious before every appointment, Marcus knew, worried about what the blood tests might show, whether the cancer was shrinking or growing. But she hid it well behind her bright chatter and ready smile. When Dr. Morrison entered, there was something different in her expression, a kind of knowing warmth that hadn't been there before. She greeted Emma with her usual affection, asking about school and listening intently as Emma described a book report she was working on. But when her eyes met Marcus's, there was an understanding there, an acknowledgement of something profound. After the examination and the routine blood draw, after Maya had taken Emma down the hall to the playroom to wait for the lab results, Dr. Morrison gestured for Marcus to sit. She settled into the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap, and for a moment she just looked at him with an expression that seemed to hold both relief and something that might have been respect. "I got a call from the Brennan Foundation," she said simply. They explained the situation, how they're covering Emma's treatment costs moving forward. Marcus nodded, still not quite able to believe it was real, even though he had the signed documents in a folder at home, physical proof that this wasn't some elaborate dream. "I still can't quite process it, that this is really happening." "I've heard of the Brennan Foundation," Dr. Morrison said. "They're legendary in pediatric oncology circles, but they work so quietly that most families never even know they exist until they intervene. The fact that they chose Emma's case, that they moved so quickly, it speaks to how seriously they took the situation." There was something in her tone that made Marcus look at her more closely. "Did you know about what happened with Dr. Pemberton?" Dr. Morrison's expression darkened. "I heard about it, yes. Not immediately, but word travels in a hospital, especially when it involves confrontations in public spaces. I was appalled, Marcus, absolutely appalled. What he said to you, the way he threatened Emma's care, it was unconscionable. I went to his office to address it, but by then, the Foundation had already been contacted. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Another person fighting for them, another person he hadn't known, was in his corner. You went to Pemberton's office? For us? Of course I did, Dr. Morrison said firmly. Emma is my patient. You are her father, doing everything humanly possible to care for her. What Pemberton did was not just cruel, it was contrary to everything medicine is supposed to stand for. We treat patients based on their needs, not their ability to pay. That's the oath we take, even if administrators sometimes forget it in their focus on balance sheets. She paused, then reached out and placed her hand over Marcus's. The gesture was maternal, comforting. I want you to know something, Marcus. In my 23 years as an oncologist, I've worked with hundreds of families. I've seen parents who were wealthy and connected, who had every resource at their disposal. And I've seen parents like you, who had nothing but determination and love. You want to know what I've learned? The resources don't matter nearly as much as the commitment. Emma is lucky to have you as her father. She's lucky that when everything was falling apart, you never stopped fighting for her. Marcus felt tears threatening again, his emotions still raw and close to the surface after the whirlwind of the past few days. I just did what any parent would do. No, Dr. Morrison said gently. You did what every parent should do, but not every parent can. What you've been through, the sacrifices you've made, they're extraordinary. Don't diminish that. When Emma returned with Maya, bouncing with excitement about the puppy picture she had been shown, Dr. Morrison delivered the news they had both been hoping for. Emma's latest blood work showed continued improvement. The cancer markers were down another 15% from the previous test. The tumors visible on her last scan had shrunk measurably. The treatment was working. Emma threw her arms around Marcus's neck, and he held his daughter close. Breathing in the antiseptic smell of hospital soap mixed with the strawberry shampoo she insisted on using, even though she had no hair to wash. Dr. Morrison was smiling, genuine joy on her face, and even Maya had tears in her eyes. We're not out of the woods yet, Dr. Morrison cautioned, always the realist. Emma still has months of treatment ahead and will need to remain vigilant. But this is very good news. Very good news indeed. As they left the hospital that afternoon, Marcus carrying Emma piggyback through the parking lot because she claimed her legs were too tired from being poked with needles. He felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just hope, but actual optimism. The belief that maybe, just maybe, they were going to make it through this. The next morning, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. The hospital's main line, but not from billing or scheduling. When he answered, a woman's voice came through, professional but warm. Mr. Chen? This is Carolyn Winters. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Sacred Heart. I was hoping you might have some time this week to meet with me. There are some matters I'd like to discuss regarding your recent experiences at our facility. Marcus felt a flicker of the old anxiety, the instinct that said people in positions of power only wanted to talk to him when there was a problem. But something in Carolyn's tone suggested this was different. He agreed to meet with her the following afternoon. Sacred Heart's administrative offices were on the top floor of the main building, a space Marcus had never had reason to visit before. The decor was noticeably nicer than the clinical areas below, with actual art on the walls and carpet that looked recently installed. Carolyn's assistant, a friendly older man, showed Marcus into a corner office with windows overlooking the city. Carolyn Winters was a woman in her early 60s, with steel grey hair cut in a sharp bob and shrewd eyes behind designer glasses. She stood when Marcus entered, coming around her desk to shake his hand before gesturing to a comfortable seating area away from her desk, 2 couches facing each other across a coffee table. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Chen," she said as they settled into their seats. "I know you have a lot going on, so I'll get straight to the point. I've become aware of an incident that occurred last week involving you and Dr. Richard Pemberton, our hospital administrator. I've reviewed the details, spoken with witnesses, and I wanted to meet with you personally to address what happened." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't expected this, wasn't sure what Carolyn wanted from him. Was he supposed to apologize for threatening to go to the media? Was this about protecting the hospital's reputation? Carolyn must have seen his discomfort because she held up a hand. Let me be clear about something right away. You are not in any trouble, Mr. Chen. You did nothing wrong. I asked you here because I believe you are owed an apology, and I wanted to deliver it in person. What Dr. Pemberton did, the way he spoke to you, the threats he made regarding your daughter's care, it was completely unacceptable. It was a violation of our hospital's values and our commitment to patient care. Marcus stared at her, momentarily speechless. An apology from the hospital administration. He had not seen that coming. Dr. Pemberton has been with this hospital for 8 years, Carolyn continued. In that time, he's been effective at managing our finances, at negotiating with insurance companies, at keeping our operations running efficiently. But efficiency cannot come at the cost of our humanity. Medicine is about healing people, and that includes treating our patients and their families with dignity and respect, regardless of their financial circumstances. She reached for a folder on the coffee table and opened it, though she didn't show Marcus its contents. After learning what happened with you, I initiated a review of Dr. Pemberton's interactions with other families in similar financial situations. What I found was disturbing. There's a pattern of behavior, of prioritizing collections over compassion, of making families feel ashamed for circumstances often beyond their control. That's not who we want to be as an institution. What does that mean? Marcus asked quietly. It means that Dr. Pemberton is no longer employed by Sacred Heart Medical Center, Carolyn said firmly. He was given the opportunity to resign, and he took it. We're conducting a comprehensive review of our financial assistance programs and our approach to families experiencing medical financial hardship. We want to ensure that what happened to you never happens to another family at this hospital. Marcus felt a complicated mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly, a sense that justice had been served for the humiliation he had endured. But there was also an unexpected twinge of guilt. A man had lost his job, potentially his career, because of how he had treated Marcus. Carolyn seemed to read his thoughts. Don't feel guilty, Mr. Chen. Dr. Pemberton's termination wasn't solely because of what happened with you. As I said, there was a pattern. You were simply the catalyst that brought the issue to light. And frankly, any administrator who threatens to deny treatment to a child because of unpaid bills has no business working in healthcare. She closed the folder and set it aside. I also want you to know that we're implementing new protocols. Any family experiencing financial hardship related to their child's care will be assigned a dedicated patient advocate, someone whose job is to help them navigate resources and assistance programs. We're expanding our charity care program and creating clearer guidelines about when and how financial concerns should be discussed with families. Because of what happened to me? Marcus asked, still trying to process all of this. Because of what happened to you, and because it should have been this way all along, Carolyn replied. Sometimes it takes someone being brave enough to stand up and say, this isn't right, for institutions to recognize they've lost their way. You did that, Marcus. You stood up for your daughter and for yourself, and in doing so, you may have helped other families who will come after you. They talked for another 20 minutes, Carolyn asking about Emma's progress and Marcus finding himself opening up about the journey they had been on, the struggles and the fear and the overwhelming relief of the Foundation's intervention. When he finally left her office, Marcus felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just a victim of a broken system anymore. He had, in some small way, helped change it. But there was still one mystery that gnawed at Marcus, one question that the Foundation representatives hadn't been able to answer because they didn't know themselves. Who had made that anonymous call? Who at Sacred Heart had seen his situation and cared enough to reach out to the Brennan Foundation on his behalf? The answer came 2 weeks later, in the most unexpected way. Marcus was at the hospital with Emma for her regular treatment session. They were in their usual room. Emma drowsy from the pre-medications they gave her to help with nausea when there was a soft knock on the door. Marcus looked up expecting to see Maya or Dr. Morrison, but instead it was Brenda, the nurse who had always looked at him with such judgment, whose disapproval he had felt like a physical weight every time he encountered her. She stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mr. Chen, could I speak with you for a moment?" Out in the hall, Marcus's first instinct was defensiveness, but something in Brenda's expression stopped him. She looked nervous, almost vulnerable, nothing like the stern, judgmental woman he had come to expect. He glanced at Emma, who was nearly asleep, then nodded and followed Brenda into the corridor. She led him a short distance down the hall, to a quiet alcove near a window that looked out over the hospital's garden. When she turned to face him, Marcus was shocked to see tears in her eyes. "I owe you an apology," Brenda said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been terrible to you. The assumptions I made, the way I looked at you, the things I said to my colleagues about you. I was wrong about everything, and I'm so deeply sorry." Marcus was too stunned to respond. This was the last thing he had expected. "I was the one who called the Brennan Foundation," Brenda continued, the words coming out in a rush now, like she needed to confess. "After I witnessed what Dr. Pemberton did to you, how he humiliated you in front of everyone, something inside me broke. I went home that night, and I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about you, about Emma, about how wrong I had been." She wiped at her eyes, smearing mascara slightly. "I've been a nurse for 32 years, Mr. Chen. I've seen a lot of families come through these halls. And somewhere along the way, I started making judgments. I started assuming that parents who looked tired and poor were neglectful or irresponsible. I forgot that everyone has a story, that appearances don't tell you anything about what someone is going through." Marcus found his voice. "You called the foundation? You're the one who helped us?" Brenda nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I started asking questions, talking to Maya and the other nurses who actually worked with Emma regularly. I learned about your wife, about how you lost everything taking care of her. I learned about your 4 jobs, about how you've been working yourself to death trying to pay for Emma's treatment. I learned that Emma talks about you constantly, about how much she loves you, about how you never miss a treatment session no matter how tired you are. She took a shaky breath. I realized I'd been looking at you and seeing everything I thought was wrong with society, when I should have been seeing one of the best fathers I've ever encountered in my career. So I called the foundation. I've known about them for years, helped with cases before, but I had never felt more certain that a family deserved their help than I did with yours." Marcus felt his own tears starting to fall. This woman who he had thought despised him, who he believed judged him for his poverty and his exhaustion, had been the one to save them. She had been the anonymous caller who changed everything. "I don't know what to say," Marcus whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Brenda replied. "I don't deserve your forgiveness or your gratitude. I just needed you to know that I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I'm so glad that Emma is going to get the treatment she needs. She's a remarkable little girl, and she deserves every chance at life." And Marcus did something that surprised them both. He stepped forward and hugged Brenda, this woman who had been a source of pain and who had become his family's salvation. She stiffened for just a moment, then hugged him back, both of them crying in a hospital hallway while life continued around them. When they pulled apart, Brenda managed a watery smile. "You should get back to Emma, and Mr. Chen, I hope you know now that you're not alone. There are people here who care, who see how hard you're fighting. Don't ever doubt that you're a good father. Don't ever doubt that Emma is lucky to have you." Marcus returned to Emma's room with a heart that felt simultaneously broken and healed. He sat beside his daughter's bed, holding her small hand as the chemotherapy dripped into her veins, and he thought about grace, about second chances, about how the people you think are your enemies might turn out to be your saviors if everyone involved is brave enough to change. Over the following weeks, as Emma continued her treatment and Marcus adjusted to his new, more sustainable schedule, he found himself becoming part of the hospital community in a different way. The parents started approaching him, asking about his experience with financial assistance, wondering if there might be help available for their own situations. Marcus always directed them to Janet Winters in patient advocacy, who had become a genuine ally. Working tirelessly to connect families with resources, Dr. Morrison told him that the changes Carolyn Winters had implemented were making a real difference, that families were being treated with more dignity, that financial concerns were being handled with more compassion and creativity. Marcus had become, without intending to, a catalyst for positive change in an institution that had almost destroyed him. But more importantly, Emma was getting better. The cancer was retreating. Her energy was returning. Her smile came more easily. She was winning her battle, and Marcus got to be there for every moment of it. Not as an exhausted ghost running on fumes, but as a present, engaged father who could actually enjoy his daughter's company instead of fighting just to stay conscious through their time together. 3 months after the Foundation's intervention, Emma rang the bell in the pediatric oncology ward, the ceremonial celebration that marked the completion of her primary treatment protocol. The hallway filled with nurses and doctors and other families, everyone clapping and cheering as Emma, wearing a rainbow-colored wig she had picked out herself, yanked the bell's rope with all her 7-year-old strength. Marcus stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and when he looked up, he saw Dr. Morrison with tears in her eyes. He saw Maya holding hands with another young patient. He saw Brenda at the back of the crowd, smiling through her own tears. And he thought about how close they had come to losing everything, how near he had been to breaking completely. But they had made it. Against odds that should have been impossible, against a system designed to crush people like them, they had made it. And they hadn't done it alone. An anonymous foundation had intervened. A nurse had found her conscience and made a call. A doctor had fought for them. A hospital administrator had chosen to make things right. A community of people, most of whom Marcus would never know, had decided his daughter's life was worth fighting for. As Emma hugged him tight, her wig slightly askew and her face radiant with joy, Marcus understood something fundamental about the world. Yes, it could be cruel. Yes, it could be unjust. Yes, it could grind down the vulnerable and reward the wealthy. But it could also be miraculous. It could also be kind. It could also surprise you with grace when you least expected it, from sources you never anticipated. The fight wasn't over. Emma still had maintenance treatment ahead, monthly checkups, years of vigilance to ensure the cancer didn't return. But they would face it together, and they would face it without the crushing weight of impossible debt and crippling fear. They would face it as a family who had been given a second chance, and Marcus was determined not to waste a single moment of it. 6 months after Emma rang that bell, Marcus stood in the parking lot of Sacred Heart Medical Center on a crisp autumn morning, watching leaves swirl across the pavement in shades of amber and crimson. He wasn't here for a treatment today. Emma's scans had come back clear for the 3rd consecutive month, and Dr. Morrison had officially moved her to quarterly monitoring instead of monthly. The relief that came with that news had been profound, like breathing freely after years of holding your breath underwater. Today, Marcus was here for something different. Carolyn Winters had invited him to speak at a hospital-wide staff meeting about patient-family experiences. When she first asked, Marcus had wanted to decline. Public speaking terrified him, and the idea of standing in front of doctors and nurses and administrators to talk about his darkest moments felt overwhelming. But Carolyn had been persistent, gentle but firm in her insistence that his voice mattered, that his perspective could help shape how the hospital approached families in crisis. So here he was, dressed in clothes he had purchased specifically for this occasion, the first new outfit he had bought himself in over 3 years. A simple button-down shirt and khakis, nothing fancy, but clean and unwrinkled and his. It felt strange, wearing clothes that didn't carry paint stains or grease marks, strange being the version of himself who walked into hospitals as a speaker rather than a desperate father clutching at hope. The conference room was larger than Marcus expected, filled with at least 100 people in various medical uniforms and business attire. He saw Dr. Morrison near the front, offering him an encouraging smile. Maya was there too, along with several other nurses from the pediatric oncology unit. Brenda sat in the middle section, her face composed, but her eyes watching him with something that looked like pride. Carolyn introduced him simply, explaining that Marcus was the father of a pediatric cancer patient who had experienced both the challenges and triumphs of navigating serious illness within their institution. Then she stepped aside, and Marcus found himself at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces that suddenly seemed far too interested in what he had to say. He had prepared notes, bullet points on a card in his pocket, but standing there under the weight of all those expectant gazes, Marcus realized he didn't need them. The story he had to tell was written into his bones, etched into his memory in ways that required no prompting to recall. My daughter Emma was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when she was 7 years old, Marcus began, his voice steadier than he expected. I'm standing here today because of the extraordinary medical care she received from Dr. Morrison and her team. But I almost lost her, not to cancer, but to something far more preventable. I almost lost her because I couldn't afford to save her. He told them everything. About working 4 jobs and sleeping in fragments. About the mounting debt and the threatening letters. About standing at a gas pump, metaphorically speaking, feeling invisible and dismissed. He told them about the confrontation with Pemberton, about being humiliated in front of strangers, about the terror of hearing that his daughter's life might be considered too expensive to save. But he also told them about the miracles, about an anonymous phone call that changed everything, about a foundation that believed children deserved treatment regardless of their parents' bank accounts. But a nurse who found the courage to acknowledge her own prejudices and make amends. About a hospital administrator who chose to make systemic changes rather than protect the status quo. I don't tell you this story to make anyone feel guilty, Marcus said, scanning the room and seeing tears on more than a few faces. I tell you this because you have incredible power. Every day you encounter people at the worst moments of their lives. They come to you scared and vulnerable and often ashamed of circumstances beyond their control. How you treat them in those moments, the dignity you afford them or deny them, it matters more than you might ever realize. He paused, thinking of Emma that morning, cheerfully eating her cereal and chattering about her upcoming school field trip to the zoo. Healthy, happy, alive. When you look at a parent who shows up in stained work clothes, who falls asleep in waiting room chairs, who can't immediately produce a credit card to cover their copay, I want you to consider that you might be looking at someone like me. Someone who is sacrificing everything. Someone who is working themselves to exhaustion. Someone who loves their child with a fierceness that would move mountains, if mountains could be moved by love alone. Marcus glanced at Brenda, who was openly crying now, and he felt his own throat tighten. We all make assumptions. We all judge based on appearances. That's human nature. But in medicine, those assumptions can have life or death consequences. They did for my family. If not for people in this room who chose to look deeper, who chose compassion over convenience, my daughter might not be here today. When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause that felt both humbling and affirming. People approached him afterward, nurses and social workers and even physicians, sharing their own stories of patients they had misjudged or families they wished they had done more to help. Several administrators asked detailed questions about what resources would have been most helpful during his crisis, taking notes for future policy implementations. Dr. Morrison hugged him tightly. You're going to help so many families, Marcus. You already have. But it was Brenda who stayed with him the longest, walking him back toward the parking lot as the meeting dispersed. They had developed an unlikely friendship over the past months, built on mutual recognition of human fallibility and the courage it takes to change. I meant what I said in there, Marcus told her as they stood by his car. About how you saved us. I don't think I've adequately expressed what that meant. Brenda shook her head, her eyes bright. You saved yourselves, Marcus. You never gave up on Emma, even when everything was stacked against you. I just made a phone call. You did the impossible part. After leaving the hospital, Marcus drove to Emma's school. He'd taken the afternoon off from his part-time shifts at the diner, something he could actually do now without panic about missed wages. He wanted to surprise Emma by picking her up personally, rather than having her take the bus to the after-school program. When she emerged from the building, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders and her hair grown back in dark curls that framed her face, Marcus felt his heart expand in his chest the way it did every time he saw her now. Every moment felt precious in a way it hadn't before. Every ordinary day a gift he never took for granted. "Daddy!" Emma called out, running toward him with the careless energy of a healthy child. "What are you doing here?" "I thought we could go to the park," Marcus said, ruffling her hair. "Maybe stop for pizza after." "What do you think?" Emma's face lit up with pure joy. "Really? On a Wednesday?" "Really," Marcus confirmed. "Sometimes Wednesdays deserve pizza too." They spent the afternoon at Riverside Park, Emma climbing on playground equipment, while Marcus pushed her on the swings, both of them laughing as the autumn sun painted everything in shades of gold. Later, sharing a pepperoni pizza at the little Italian place near their apartment, Emma told him about her day with the unself-conscious detail only children possess. She talked about her best friend Sophie and the math test she thought she aced, and the book she was reading about a girl who traveled through time. She was just a kid, worried about kid things, her illness receding into the background of her life rather than dominating every moment. This was what Marcus had fought for, he realized. Not just Emma's survival, but her ability to be a child again. That evening, after Emma had finished her homework and they had watched an episode of her favorite show together, Marcus tucked her into bed with her collection of stuffed animals arranged around her like a protective army. He sat on the edge of her mattress, smoothing back her curls, and Emma looked up at him with her mother's eyes. "Daddy," she said softly, "are you happy now?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "You used to look so sad all the time," Emma said with the blunt honesty of children, "even when you smiled. But now you look happy for real. I was just wondering if you are." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, overwhelmed by his daughter's perceptiveness and the weight of everything they had been through together. "Yeah, baby, I'm happy. Are you?" Emma nodded vigorously. "I'm so happy, Daddy. I'm glad I'm not sick anymore. And I'm glad you don't have to work all the time. I missed you even when you were there." That night, after Emma had drifted off to sleep, Marcus sat on their tiny apartment balcony with a cup of tea, looking out at the Portland skyline glittering in the distance. He thought about the man he had been a year ago, broken and desperate, and running on nothing but fear and determination. That man felt like a stranger now, someone Marcus could barely recognize. The journey had changed him in ways both obvious and subtle. He was no longer just surviving, but actually living. He had learned that asking for help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. He had discovered that people were capable of both casual cruelty and extraordinary kindness, sometimes the same people. He had learned that transformation was possible at any age, that prejudices could be unlearned, that systems could be changed when enough people decided they should be. Most importantly, he had learned that his worth as a father wasn't measured by his bank account or his job title or the clothes he wore. It was measured by his presence, his perseverance, his unwavering commitment to his daughter's well-being. He had been enough all along, even when the world tried to tell him he wasn't. Marcus pulled out his phone and composed an email to the Brennan Foundation, something he did every few weeks now. He attached a recent photo of Emma at the park, her face split in a grin as she hung upside down from the monkey bars. He wrote about her latest checkup, about her thriving in school, about the ordinary, beautiful, mundane details of their lives that were only possible because of the Foundation's intervention. He ended the email the way he always did. "Thank you for giving us our future back. We will never take it for granted." Before going to bed, Marcus stopped in Emma's doorway, watching her sleep in the soft glow of her nightlight. Mr. Waddles, the stuffed penguin, was clutched in her arms, and her breathing was deep and steady. In that moment, standing in the doorway of their modest apartment watching his healthy daughter sleep peacefully, Marcus felt wealthier than he had ever felt in his life. The road ahead would still have challenges. Emma's cancer could return, though every clear scan reduced that risk. Money would still be tight, though manageable now. Life would still be complicated and messy and hard sometimes. But they would face it together, father and daughter, survivors of a battle that had tested them to their limits and somehow, miraculously, ended in victory. Marcus thought about all the people who had played a role in their survival. Dr. Morrison, with her expertise and advocacy. Maya, with her gentle care and warm blankets. Brenda, with her transformative phone call. Carolyn Winters, with her willingness to implement change. The Brennan Foundation, with their life-saving generosity. Pat at the diner, who had given him work when he needed it most. Dave at the construction supply, who had understood about family. Even Dr. Pemberton, in his own way, had been part of the story. A catalyst that revealed systemic problems and created opportunities for reform. It took a village, people said. Marcus had learned that it took more than a village. It took strangers willing to become allies. It took institutions willing to examine their failures. It took foundations willing to invest in families they would never meet. It took nurses willing to confront their own biases. It took fathers willing to sacrifice everything. It took daughters brave enough to fight for their lives. And it took hope. Always hope. Even in the darkest moments, when everything seemed impossible, hope had been the small flame that kept burning, refusing to be extinguished. Marcus closed Emma's door softly and headed to his own room. Tomorrow, he would work his shift at the diner, chat with the regulars, serve coffee and flip eggs. Tomorrow, Emma would go to school and worry about spelling tests instead of chemotherapy. Tomorrow, life would continue in all its ordinary, extraordinary ways. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.